11 minutes after Israel declared her sovereignty in May of 1948, our United States President, Harry Truman, made the best decision that any president could have made. He recognized Israel's sovereignty, and he told the world and Israel's hostile enemies and neighbors that the United States of America would have Israel's back. As President of the United States, I want you also to know I and the United States of America will once again have Israel's back. I am highly honored to be here this afternoon in the company of so many of my very dear friends, and I also want to thank my very good friend, Danny Rosen, for the wonderful introduction that he just gave. I've been a longtime advocate for Israel, as Dan told you, and also of the Jewish people, because my love for Israel and for the Jewish people deepened, as Danny said, when the day after I graduated from high school, I left and I took a plane and I went to work on a kibbutz in Beersheba. It was called Kibbutz Be'eri. At that time, we didn't have rockets coming across into our kibbutz on a nearly daily basis, the way that they suffer today. But it opened my eyes. We would wake up in the morning at 4 o'clock. We would get on a flatbed pulled behind a diesel tractor, and we would go out to the fields where I would begin the process of picking weeds in the cotton field from 4 in the morning until noon. Thereafter, we would come back to the wonderful site of the kibbutz. We would help in the kitchen, and only after then could we finally lay down in the part of the kibbutz that we affectionately called the ghetto, where we made our home. It was a absolutely wonderful experience for an 18-year-old girl from Anoka, Minnesota. It opened my eyes like nothing else. It was 1974, and Israel, as you know, in 1974 was a very different place from what it is today. And at that time, we got off the plane. We got on the tarmac. We literally went down. There were card tables set up. Chickens were flying and people were screaming. It was a very different place from Ben Gurion Airport today. And again, it opened my eyes. But more importantly, it opened my heart. It opened my heart to the Jewish people, to the plight of the Jewish people. And I have never, nor will I ever forget the love and the place in my heart that America needs to have for Israel, and in particular for the Jewish people. And our longing has always been next year, Jerusalem. And I am thrilled to say it's a very different way that I go to Israel today than I did back when I was 18 years of age. And I've been honored to go back many times as a member of Congress and to meet with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And as President of the United States, my visit, my maiden voyage visit, will be to sit down with the Prime Minister and to speak to the Knesset, if I am privileged to do that. And I also want you to know it will be on Inauguration Day under my administration that the United States will move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And I already have secured from a donor who has told me he will personally pay for the ambassador's home and embassy to be moved to Jerusalem, so we're good to go. The boxes will be unpacked on Inauguration Day. Today we commemorate the 70th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and it was on that fateful day that there were some 19-year-old young men from St. Paul, Minnesota, who were stationed at Pearl Harbor. They reported to their superiors that they had sighted something that they thought was very unusual, which ultimately came to be known as a Japanese submarine. But their warning signal from those young St. Paul, Minnesota boys became a bigger calamity, and it was something that was ignored. The same is true today with Iran. The same is true today with other dangerous actors in the world. And I fear that we are ignoring the warning signs, and I worry about what other Pearl Harbors might be in the future of the United States, certainly of the greatest ally of the United States, which is Israel. And it seems as if lately that our president has forgotten the importance of Israel to the United States, and he thinks only in terms of our relationship of what we, the United States, do for Israel. Because you see, it seems that the president is more concerned about if Israel builds apartments or additional homes on its own land than the threats that are currently being received on a regular and daily and sometimes hourly basis to Israel and America in the region. You see, I think the president was right to promise to veto the Palestinians' bid for statehood in the UN Security Council, and I thank him for that. But in large part, it was the president's weakness in the Middle East. He put daylight almost immediately between the United States and Israel, the only president to do so. And that has emboldened the Palestinians to attempt to achieve statehood through the UN rather than through the legitimate negotiation table with Israel. Our policy has confused engagement with appeasement, and it's inspired Israel's enemies. The Palestinians must also recognize Israel's right to exist, which they have not. And the Palestinians must renounce violence against Israel in order to become considered even a serious partner with Israel in the peace process. Clearly, they are not. My administration's policy will be that the Palestinian Authority's compliance with its prior agreements is the first step that has to be taken to assure peace in the Middle East. The Palestinian Authority must meet its existing written obligations to collect illegal weapons. They have not. Pursue terrorists. They have not. Cooperate with Israeli security forces. They have not. Change the Fatah Constitution, which still calls for the complete eradication of the State of Israel. They have not. And stop inciting terrorism. They have not. Because like you, my commitment is unequivocal and unchanging. We stand with Israel. And I'm sure we all understand, today more than ever, Israel requires the necessary aid that the United States gives to our ally. They are our only ally and the only real democracy in the Middle East region. But if we are to continue to provide assistance to Israel, then the United States needs to get her own fiscal house in order, and we have not. You may have noticed there's a vocal minority in this country today. It's called Occupy Wall Street, otherwise known as the Obama re-election team. And that's the truth. They believe that the economic problems that we face are capitalism or free markets. They have one bottom line in Occupy Wall Street, and it's this: they want other people to pay for their stuff. That doesn't work in the United States of America because we are here to occupy America. The problem, you see, is that government is doing both what the Constitution and decent morality prohibit, and that's crony capitalism, or forcefully taking your money for the purpose of paying off a politician's political friends. People are tired of that game, and as President of the United States, I assure you, crony capitalism's days are over. The problem is one set of standards for individual Americans and another set of standards for those who make political donations to candidates. And the problem is an individual tax code with 3.8 million words. When I worked as a former federal tax litigation attorney, I had to deal with those unwieldy 3.8 million words. And it's too complicated for the average American. It's too complicated for people who work for the IRS. It is time to change the tax code. Our corporate tax code is what is making America hopelessly uncompetitive at almost 40% and getting higher when you add the federal and state taxes. And it's a tax code that contains loopholes that are exploited by companies large enough to hire a veritable army of lawyers. As Investor's Business Daily newspaper wrote, in 1981, the entire developed world had high corporate tax rates. They averaged 47%. Then capital became mobile, and rates plummeted, corporate tax rates, that is, to 25%, and they haven't been falling first. But it's the United States of America that's remained stuck since 1986 in an out-of-date, highly uncompetitive corporate tax rate that is literally sending our U.S. companies fleeing the United States for a more competitive tax climate. Just ask any number of companies, why did you leave the United States? And they'll tell you that between the high corporate tax rate and unreasonable regulatory burdens in this country, other nations are now a more profitable place to do business, to receive a return on investment. Did you ever think in your lifetime you would live to see the day when the United States is not the freest, most economically innovative nation in the world? As President of the United States, I assure you, that is my priority, to make us competitive once again in the world. For your sake, for your future, and for Wall Street in particular, we need to wake up and stop blaming job creators for the failures that were created by very selfish politicians who wink at their political donors. Because politicians are assuring their friends that with government's financial backing, their businesses will never fail. That's what I call the Jobs and Housing Destruction Act, also known as Dodd-Frank. And that's why I wrote the bill to 100% repeal Dodd-Frank. Under Dodd-Frank, there are 400 new rules that are required to be written. 26% of those rules so far have been written. And do you know that they now will require just those 26% of the rules, an estimated 11 million uncompensated man-hours in compliance by business. That's the lack of competitiveness that we're embracing in the United States of America. But as president, I will repeal Dodd-Frank, and I will repeal Obamacare. This is happening in the United States every day, where politicians are winking at their political donors. Perhaps no better poster child is that of Solyndra, where President Obama conveniently put his political fundraiser in the Department of Energy specifically for the purpose of pointing out which loans should go to which political donors. That's Solyndra. It's ugly, and it has to stop, because you see, we are not a banana republic. We're the United States of America, and we need to act like it. We need a system that forces large, well-connected corporations to play by the same rules as small businesses and individual Americans. We believe in equal treatment under the law. You see, there's a reason why our founding fathers decided to establish our political capital in a different city from our financial capital. And I think it's time for us to reaffirm that wisdom, that decision, by getting Washington, D.C. out of directing free markets. They aren't free when they come at the hands of Washington politicians. And I'm running for president because I understand the difference between free markets and Bernie Madoff-style gangster government. My administration will stop the Obama administration's dangerous policies and the delegitimization of Israel. He has delegitimized Israel by wrongly describing Israel as a 60-year-long occupation which displaced and caused Palestinian suffering, and by wrongly blaming Israel and her settlements for the lack of the peace process in the Middle East. Obama abandoned prior U.S. policy and UN Resolution 242's insistence that Israel is entitled to defensible borders. The Obama administration also abrogated former President Bush's commitments in Bush's 2004 letter to Ariel Sharon. Bush's letter and subsequent congressional resolutions committed to the United States to the policy that Israel will retain large West Bank settlement blocks, that there will be no right of return to Israel for Palestinian so-called refugees, and that the Palestinian Authority's compliance with its obligations, including the Palestinian Authority's obligation to stop inciting terror, which it's never stopped doing, is the first step that must be taken toward Middle East peace. Instead, Barack Obama is improperly calling for Israel to retreat to indefensible 1949 armistice lines with swaps, and to then face still further demands to divide Jerusalem. I will guarantee you without any reservation, I will never call for a divided Jerusalem. The Obama administration has also unconditionally given the Palestinians unprecedented amounts of United States foreign aid. They have opposed congressional efforts to condition that aid on the real steps that would bring about peace. The so-called Palestinian right of return would demographically destroy Israel, as we know, by swamping it with millions of Arabs who have never lived in Israel, thereby turning the world's only Jewish state into the world's 23rd Arab state. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta recently once again publicly displayed this administration's disdain for Israel by putting Israel on the same footing as the Palestinians and declaring that they, quote, get to the damn table, unquote, to resume peace talks. And the president derisively said Israel's prime minister was someone he had to, quote, deal with every day, unquote. But the president's ambassador to Belgium went even further. He justified anti-Semitism because of Israel's actions toward the Palestinians, and the president should fire him immediately for those irresponsible remarks. Instead of defaming Israel, as the Obama administration has done, my administration will recognize that, in the words of Israel's Declaration of Independence, Israel is a country that is based on the precepts of liberty, justice, and peace taught by the Hebrew prophets, and which has safeguarded the sanctity and inviolability of the shrines and holy places of all religions. And like Israel's Declaration of Independence, my administration will similarly call upon Israel's neighbors to cooperate with the Jewish nation and return to the ways of peace for the common good of all mankind. And while the president demands that Israel give back land necessary to protect their existence, he has taken his eye off the most serious threat to Middle East security, and that's in Iran with a nuclear weapon, which must never be allowed to occur. Some 80 years ago, the world saw evil rising, and a madman spoke, but the world chose not to listen. And the world sank into enormous conflict, and millions of Jews lost their lives in addition to others. Today, a madman is speaking, and once again, it seems as if the world isn't really listening. Though Iran's president has made his intentions for Israel abundantly clear in repeated attempts, including as recently as his incorrigible visit here to the United States in September. He intends to wipe Israel off the face of the map. Make no mistake about that. And once he obtains nuclear weapons, he will also use them against the United States of America, given the chance. Make no mistake about that. Consider the Iranian Constitution, which states that Iran's army and Revolutionary Guard will, and I quote, be responsible for fulfilling the ideological mission of jihad in God's way. That is, extending the sovereignty of God's law throughout the world. Think of that. This is in the Constitution of Iran. We ignore these words and a call for global jihad and a global established caliphate at our peril. When a madman speaks, world, pay attention. And unfortunately, Iran has made good on that very terrible promise in the last 30 years, from the bombing of the United States Marine base in Beirut to being the leading supplier of arms to kill American soldiers in Iraq. Iran is at the heart of much of Israel's problems. Two principles must guide United States policy toward Iran. First, we must never allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. And second, we must realize that this is every bit as much a threat to us in the United States as it is to Israel. And we must not, we cannot, we absolutely can't ever allow the outsourcing of the United States national security, certainly not Israel's national security, to the United Nations. This is our moment for clarity. Our moment for clarity for standing with Israel and against the UN. We can't afford to wait until the election to change course. The president must make it his policy now to support the dissidents of the current regime in Iran, to bring down the terrorist leaders, and to replace it with a Democrat government that can be at peace with the United States, Israel, and the free world. You see, I am a Pollyanna. This is something that I hope would one day happen. The United States must be clear that it is the United States policy to stop Iran from building and deploying nuclear weapons. In leading from behind, President Obama has been ambiguous with Iran, and he's given them the luxury of time to advance their nuclear weapons program without real punishment, as we learned, unfortunately, from the IAEA report. The United States should develop and deploy comprehensive ballistic missile systems on land, on sea, in the air, and also in space to protect the American people and our allies from the threat of ballistic missiles. Iran, with the help of the Chinese, has obtained missile delivery systems for nuclear weapons that pose a threat to Israel, to the region, and potentially also to us here in the United States. And while we do not buy oil from Iran, Iran is a major player in the oil market, and that affects price, which directly affects the United States. Therefore, for the last 4 years, I have been working to legalize American energy production to free us from Iran's influence through oil. President Obama must immediately end his doctrine of appeasement and weakness toward Iran and pursue decisive, common-sense strategies ignored or rejected currently by this administration. We also need secretaries of defense and state who fully support a pro-freedom and a pro-security policy toward Iran. We need them to replace those in the bureaucracy, especially at the State Department, who won't fully support this policy. Iran needs crushing economic sanctions, and unfortunately, our options are diminishing by the day, including on the central bank and on oil and gas industries. We have to hurt the Iranian economy more severely by doing damage to their oil revenues and their central bank. The president will stand with Occupy Wall Street, but he won't stand with Israel. And when Israel looks at President Obama, they don't see a friend. The State Department should regularly expose the atrocious activities of the Iranian regime that are arresting, imprisoning, torturing, and murdering innocent Iranian citizens. We have to accelerate the covert operations and cyber operations in Iran. I am privileged to sit on the House Intelligence Committee, where we are focused on national security and on the classified secrets of our nation. And the President, we must order the CIA director to take all means necessary to stop Iran from getting the bomb before it's too late. The Pentagon must prepare a war plan. Only a fool would wish for war, but only a fool wouldn't prepare a plan in the case of another nation preparing for war, should all else fail in preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. But the President's lack of leadership and the failure of the Super Committee to lead will, in Defense Secretary Panetta's words, create devastating cuts that will seriously damage readiness, making a military response more difficult. President Obama has seriously damaged the security of Israel by decreasing our status as a military superpower. And part of that plan should be to direct the United States Navy to make preparations for a possible blockade of Iran's ports from all oil and gas imports and exports to cut off critical petroleum revenues from going to the regime in Tehran. We need to continue comprehensive missile defense development while we continue to move additional Aegis and Patriot missile defense systems into the Middle East to protect our citizens and assets, Israel and our allies. And we also must sell to Israel the additional fighter jets, the bunker buster bombs, the refueling tankers, and other materials that Israel needs to defend herself. My administration will recognize that Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people, a vibrant democracy and America's staunch ally. And my administration will fully recognize Jerusalem as Israel's undivided capital, and we will be the first administration, as I said, to finally implement a law passed by Congress requiring states to move their department of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. And my administration will also recognize Israel's 1980 annexation of the Golan Heights and any settlements which Israel, as a sovereign state, chooses to annex. Simply put, my administration will accord Israel the respect to which sovereign democratic nations are entitled. On the day of my inauguration, as I said, I will announce that our embassy will move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And I do not take lightly the prospect of committing United States troops in an effort to stop Iran. As I said, only a fool wishes for war. But we must be necessary to do whatever is necessary to stop the Iranians from obtaining the nuclear weapon and massively destabilizing the region by attacking Israel and supplying those weapons to even more radical regimes or individuals, as they have stated they would share the nuclear weapon with Syria and with Sudan, and they would use them to do harm to America and our way of life. I recognize that our security is intertwined with the security of Israel. We can never forget a madman. Hitler once famously said in justification of his order to murder millions of Jews, quote, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" Ahmadinejad is counting on the same collective memory loss today as he marches toward a second Holocaust. Make no mistake, we must send him the message that we will never forget. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. And if we have time, I'd be delighted to take your questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, Q&A mics are available in either aisle.
Hi, Barry. Hi, Murray.
Congresswoman Bachmann, only several months ago, a major national poll showed for the first time in many years well over half of American Jews now oppose the establishment of a Palestinian state, and overwhelming numbers of American Jews oppose continuing the $700 million in U.S. aid to the Palestinian Arab Authority. What is your position on statehood and continuing this aid to the Palestinians?
I do not see today, presently, that there is a road for statehood with the current state of affairs. I think there would need to be radical changes afoot, and as was seen horrifically this last weekend by our current Defense Secretary, Leon Panetta, there's a complete misunderstanding of this process. Israel is the victim in this case, and Israel is not the one that needs to alter what she is doing.
And the money.
And the
financial aid to the Palestinian Authority.
That is something that I think that the United States should end.
Representative Bachmann, my name is Ari Friedman. I'm a practicing general pediatrician north of Chicago. As pediatricians, we view our successes in preventative medicine with a tremendous amount of pride. And we, as a specialty, consider the modern vaccine schedule to be the centerpiece of what we do in preventing illness in children. Earlier in the campaign, you were reported to make some comments in regard to one vaccine, Gardasil in particular, but all of us in this room, I think, are aware of the difficulties you must face in dealing with the media. So I was just hoping you could clarify your views on vaccines in general and perhaps Gardasil in particular.
Well, I would like to see the creation of even more vaccines and more medical cures. In the 1920s, we had a remarkable meteoric rise and increase in the amount of vaccines that were created and cures. Insulin, tuberculosis vaccines, whooping cough. This literally changed the course of history, and this was good. But the problem is that bureaucracy has risen up to such an extent that today, because of the FDA and other measures, we're no longer seeing the miracle cures that are coming forward. We need those cures. As President of the United States, I would change that process so that the United States once again becomes the mecca for the creation of new medical cures. I believe in that very strongly. I also led the charge against Obamacare in the United States Congress. I led that charge, and I brought 40,000 Americans here to Washington, D.C. to fight against that measure. I believe very strongly that socialized medicine would be wrong for the United States, and Obamacare will ultimately collapse the private insurance industry, and we will, at some point, truly have socialized medicine. We can't have that in the United States and think that we will survive. My issue in the former debates regarding that vaccine was really with the issue of crony capitalism. That's what the problem was. I spoke to that briefly during my remarks today. It isn't right when a politician receives money from a political donor and in turn pays off that political donor either with legislation that would create a particular advantage or shut out their competition or give them an unfair grant that shouldn't be theirs in the first place. That's my concern, is crony capitalism.
My name is Nelson Wolf. I happen to be Jewish, and I happen to be a former submarine medical officer, but currently I'm an interventional cardiologist at a medical school. I'm not going to ask you about any of those topics. My concern is
But you do have a very lovely pedigree.
Okay. What I am going to ask you about is economics. My concern is that unlike the Depression in the 1930s, where we had workers, manufacturers, and employers who were ready to clunk together and all they needed is a spark, I don't see that our school system is turning out either during the regular school K through 12 or during the postgraduate, if you will, the universities, turning out a workforce that is ready for the 21st century. And what we need to reinvigorate our economy is that workforce. So first question, do you agree with me? And second question is, how do you fix it?
Number one, I do agree with you. I am a mother of 5 biological children and 23 foster children that we raised in our home and launched into the world. And I am very concerned about the educational system. I'm very concerned about the educational system. I worked in the real world. My husband and I started our own successful company. I worked for years as a federal tax litigation attorney, but I was extremely nervous about what I saw our foster children bring home in the backpack. I saw our 11th grade foster daughter bring home her math homework, and it was coloring posters. Now, my 3- and 4-year-olds color, but when you're in 11th grade, you should be learning math. You shouldn't be coloring. That's what got me involved in politics. I wasn't interested in politics, but I did see that we were losing the finest educational system the world has ever known. What I did is lead a movement in my home state of Minnesota. We became the first state in the country to repeal and get rid of the federal government's dumbed-down, politically correct national education standards and replace them with true academic standards. What I believe is that the United States government should get out of the education business. They're very bad at it. I would shut down the Federal Department of Education. And I believe instead the states, I would encourage them to adopt true choice in education. We homeschooled our biological children because we wanted them to know how to read, and then we placed them in private schools. But my state only allowed my foster children one option, the public schools. That's why I got involved. Education is one part. We are not turning out the number of engineers and the number of chemists that the United States needs. In fact, Steve Jobs, before he passed away, berated Barack Obama and said, look, I have to relocate our Apple company and parts of it in China because we don't have the 30,000 engineers that we need in the United States. We need to produce more. But here's also something else that we need to do. We need to continue to put out the animating principles of the United States to young people. One of the greatest lessons that can be learned is this one. No one owes you a living. That's a great lesson to learn in life. And I say that because I came from a family where my father was an engineer, and overnight our family went to below poverty. When I was 12 years of age, I got jobs babysitting just so that I could pay for my glasses and pay for my clothing. It was one of the best gifts that God ever gave me, that time when I needed to embrace the responsibilities of life. I think that's something that parents, not government, but something that parents need to focus on, teaching their children that no one owes you a living. Yes, we love you, but no one owes you a living.
I'm Ken Abramowitz. Excellent talk, thank you. Iran has publicly declared a determination to create a world without Israel and America, and has in effect declared genocide against both Israel and America. Do you think America should insist that Iran be kicked out of the UN? And if the UN does not react and kick Iran out of the US should leave the United Nations and save $8 billion?
I am completely on board with that estimation. I think the most overrated organization in the world today is the UN, and I'd be more than happy to back that up. Is it time to go? No more questions? All right, we've got the ultimate hook. You've been a fabulous audience. God bless you all. Shalom Aleichem.